Welcome to CozySideAudio, where every story pulls you deeper. If you like the thrill, the mystery, and the chase, like, share, and subscribe before the next clue disappears.
CozySideAudio presents The Phantom Files, The Melody Beneath the Lake. Chapter 1. Windmere Hollow was the kind of village that seemed to have fallen asleep decades ago and never quite woken up. The roofs sagged under a thatch of green moss, the cobblestone paths were uneven and polite in their disrepair, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and wood smoke, even in summer. The houses stood shoulder to shoulder as if sharing secrets, and the church bell tolled every evening at 6 not to announce prayer, but simply because it always had. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were quietly noted behind curtains. So when a pale blue car trundled down the single-lane road one June afternoon, trailing a cloud of dust and curiosity, heads turned in the windows of the bakery, the post office, the pub. And when the car finally stopped outside the ivy-wrapped cottage on Bramble Row, the entire village of Windmere Hollow seemed to hold its breath. Out stepped a man in his 30s, tall, tired-looking, with kind eyes and a limp in his left leg. Then a girl followed. Small, slender, with hair like stormlight, the kind that looked brown at a glance but shimmered gold when the sun found it. Her name was Elsie Wren, and she carried her life in one cardboard box pressed against her chest. Her father, Arthur Wren, was a carpenter. After Elsie's mother had died the previous winter, he'd packed them up and left the city behind, claiming they both needed a quiet place. Windmere Hollow, according to the estate listing, was quiet. The kind of quiet that could be healing. Only when Elsie stepped out of the car, she didn't feel healed. She felt watched. The cottage on Bramble Row was smaller than the photos had suggested. Its roof sagged like an old man's shoulders, and ivy had crept over one of the upstairs windows like a green hand that never stopped reaching. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp stone and lavender polish, and the floorboards sighed under every step. Arthur set down the box labeled kitchen and tried for a smile. "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "it's not much, but it's ours." Elsie nodded politely. She didn't tell him the wallpaper reminded her of hospital curtains, or that the silence felt too heavy, like it had weight. Instead, she asked, "What's that smell?" "Old house smell," he said, still forcing brightness into his voice. "Means it's got stories." Elsie wasn't sure she wanted to know them. By evening, the moving van was gone and the village had returned to its sleepy rhythm. The lamplighter, a stooped man with a cap too big for his head, shuffled down the lane, lighting each post one by one. The glow of gaslight spilled across the windows like honey, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and was quiet again. Arthur made tea because tea was what you did when you didn't know what else to do, and they sat together at the little kitchen table. He asked if she liked her new room. She said yes. He didn't ask if she missed her mother. She didn't say that she did. They existed in that polite silence that often follows grief, where both people are afraid to speak the thing that already fills the room. Later, as Elsie brushed her teeth in the creaky upstairs bathroom, she noticed the window above the sink was open a crack. The night air slipped in, cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine and rain. And beneath it, just faintly, she thought she heard something. A hum. Not mechanical, not human. Just a note, long and low like a sigh through hollow reeds. She froze, toothbrush in hand. It was gone as quickly as it came. She leaned toward the glass, listening harder, but heard only the wind. When she mentioned it to her father before bed, he smiled in that distracted way grown-ups do when they don't really listen. "It's probably the frogs," he said. "Country noise. You'll get used to it." But Elsie wasn't sure she wanted to. The next morning, Windmere Hollow looked different, brighter somehow. The fog had lifted off the hills, revealing fields that shimmered gold-green in the sunlight. Arthur had already gone to town to meet his new employer, leaving Elsie to explore the village alone. She wandered down the narrow lane that curved like a question mark, past gardens overrun with roses and wild mint. The villagers she passed smiled vaguely, their eyes following her just a beat too long. They were friendly enough polite in that cautious way small towns often are, but there was something about their smiles. A kind of sympathy. Like they already knew she wouldn't be staying long. By mid-morning she found herself standing before the village school, a red brick building with peeling paint and a playground surrounded by iron railings. Children her age laughed and ran in the yard. She hesitated at the gate, clutching her satchel. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped inside. "New girl!" someone shouted immediately. A cluster of children turned toward her, curiosity sharp as the summer sun. A girl with freckles and straw-colored hair bounced over first. "I'm Mara, and that's my brother Toby," she said, pointing to a boy balancing on the fence. "You're Elsie, right? My mom said someone new was moving into Bramble Row. That's near the lake." "The lake?" Elsie echoed. The boy Toby grinned. "Hollowmere Lake. Don't go near it unless you want to be sung to death." The others burst into laughter and Mara rolled her eyes. "He's just trying to scare you," she said. "He says that to everyone." Still, Elsie found herself glancing toward the far edge of the village to the dip in the land where she could just make out a glimmer of water through the trees. At lunch, Mara and Toby invited her to sit with them beneath the oak tree behind the school. They traded sandwiches and stories, and Elsie learned the kind of things that only children in small towns know: which houses are haunted, which shopkeepers are secretly mean, and which teachers smell faintly of onions. Then Toby leaned in, lowering his voice. "Do you want to see something weird?" Mara groaned. "Not the lake again." "Yes, the lake again," he said. "It's just a bit of a walk. Come on, Elsie, unless you're scared." Elsie hesitated, but curiosity won. The path wound through tall reeds and whispering birch trees, their white trunks gleaming like bones in the afternoon light. Birds sang somewhere unseen, and the air grew cooler the closer they got. After 10 minutes, the trees opened up, and there it was, Hollowmere Lake. It was larger than she expected. The water was dark, almost black, yet clear enough to catch the shimmer of light deep beneath the surface. It was perfectly still. Too still. Even the wind seemed to pause at its edge. "Looks normal," Elsie said, though her voice came out quieter than intended. "Wait," Toby whispered. "Just listen." They stood there, motionless. At first, she heard nothing. Then very faintly it came that same hum she'd heard from her window. A melody without words, so soft it could have been imagined. It seemed to come from beneath the water, a vibration that touched the soles of her feet. Mara crossed her arms. "It's just the wind. Don't start again." But Toby's grin faltered. "The wind doesn't sound like that." Elsie felt the hair on her arms rise. The melody wasn't frightening exactly. It was sad, beautiful, the kind of song that made you want to lean closer just to catch it properly. Then a ripple broke the surface, small, gentle, like something had moved far below. "Let's go," Elsie whispered. No one argued. That night she dreamed of water. Dark water, stretching forever. A song rising from below, each note like a thread pulling her down, down, down. She woke gasping, tangled in her bedsheets, the room heavy with the smell of damp earth. Her feet were cold. When she looked down, her nightdress was wet at the hem. Mud clung to her toes. Outside her window, the lake shimmered faintly under the moonlight, as if watching her. And somewhere in that stillness, just barely, the lullaby began again. Chapter 2. Elsie Wren didn't tell her father about the dream. She'd told him enough strange things since moving to Windmere Hollow about the humming window, the feeling of being watched, the stillness of the lake, and every time, his answers had been the same. "It's nothing, Elsie. Country air. You'll get used to it." But she wasn't getting used to it. If anything, she was growing more aware of the strange quiet that clung to the village, the way people avoided saying certain things, or how their eyes shifted whenever Hollowmere Lake came up. Even at school, when the subject turned toward it, voices dropped and laughter thinned, as though the water could hear them. That morning, she woke before dawn. Pale blue light pressed through the curtains, and the house was so silent she could hear the clock ticking downstairs. For a moment she thought she heard it again, the hum from her dream, low and distant. She pushed aside the curtain. The lake shimmered in the distance, silver as a mirror. And this time, she thought she saw something move. A small shape on the surface? A figure? A shadow? It rippled once and vanished. Elsie closed the curtain and didn't look again. School that day felt different. The air was too heavy, the sunlight too bright. The teachers spoke in voices that didn't quite carry, and several students looked pale, their eyes rimmed red as if they hadn't slept. Mara was one of them. She sat at her desk, chin in hand, staring blankly out the window. Elsie nudged her. "You okay?" Mara blinked, her eyes slowly focusing. "Just tired." "You look more than tired." "Couldn't sleep," Mara murmured. "I kept hearing music." Elsie's heart gave a sudden, painful thump. "What kind of music?" Mara's brow furrowed as though she wasn't sure herself. "Just soft, you know? Like someone humming in the dark. I think it came from outside my window." Elsie's skin prickled. She wanted to tell Mara everything, that she'd heard it too, that she'd seen the lake glowing in the night. But before she could speak, Toby cut in from behind them. "Don't listen to her," he said. "She's trying to scare you." "I'm not," Mara protested. "I really heard it." "Sure you did. Like the time you saw the ghost cow in Farmer Hal's field." "That was real." "Was not." Their argument carried on until the teacher called for quiet, but Elsie didn't join in. Because she had heard it. And deep down, she was starting to believe the melody was real. That evening, Arthur Wren returned home late from work, his hands covered in sawdust and his smile more tired than usual. He made dinner, beans on toast, the one thing he didn't burn, and they ate mostly in silence. When Elsie asked about his job, he said it was going fine. When she asked if they could go visit the town library tomorrow, he nodded absently. But something was different about him. His eyes were glassier than usual, his movements slower. Once or twice she caught him staring out the window toward the lake, his lips moving faintly as though mouthing along to a song only he could hear. "Dad?" she asked finally. He blinked, snapping out of it. You were, never mind." "What?" She forced a small smile. "Nothing, just tired." He smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night she tried to stay awake. She told herself she'd read until her eyes gave out, but the moment she opened her book, the steady rhythm of the rain against her window lulled her into stillness. Somewhere between waking and sleep she heard it again, the humming. Soft, almost human, drifting in waves through the glass. Elsie sat up, heart pounding. The melody was clearer now, fragile and beautiful, like the edge of a memory. It carried no words, but she could almost feel meaning inside it. Sadness, loneliness, a call. Without realizing it, she stood. Her feet found the floorboards, cold beneath her toes. The sound drew her like a thread, leading her to the window. When she looked out, the lake glowed faintly under the moonlight. Mist curled across its surface, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw figures there, children standing knee-deep in the water, their faces blank, eyes glassy. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just listened. Her breath fogged the glass. When she blinked, the figures were gone. The next morning, 3 students were missing from school. No one said much about it. The teachers looked grim but dismissive. "It's probably a mix-up," said Mrs. Clover, the headmistress. "Family trips, sick days. Children are always vanishing off the register for a week or two this time of year. But Elsie saw the way Mara fidgeted in her seat, biting her nails, and the way Toby's grin never reached his eyes. At lunch, they gathered under the oak again, though the laughter that had once filled the space was gone. "It's the lake," Toby said suddenly. "It has to be." Mara glared at him. "Don't start." "Then you explain it. 3 kids gone overnight. No one even heard anything." Elsie looked between them. "Who were they?" "Daniel, Sophie, and Liam," Mara said quietly. "They lived on the far side near the woods. My mum says their parents think they ran off to the city." Toby scoffed. "Yeah, sure, because 12-year-olds are always running away in the middle of the night." Mara's voice dropped. "You think it's the song, don't you?" Toby hesitated. "I don't know what I think, but Mum used to say the lake takes what it's owed." Elsie frowned. "What does that mean?" He shrugged. "She told me once, before she stopped talking about it, that there was a flood here a long time ago. Said the water wasn't supposed to stay. Said something made it stay." "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He just looked toward the line of trees in the distance, where the faint shimmer of Hollowmere was visible through the fog. That afternoon, the village felt wrong. The air smelled of rain and something metallic. People walked slower, eyes unfocused. At the grocer's, the shopkeeper hummed softly to herself, an odd, tuneless sound that made the hair on Elsie's arms rise. She glanced around and realized half the people in the market were humming too. Even her father, when she found him fixing a cabinet in the kitchen that evening, was doing it. Low, under his breath, almost unconsciously. "Dad," she said, trying to sound light, "you're humming." He stopped immediately, blinking in confusion. "Am I?" "Yeah?" "Huh, must have been thinking about something." "What?" He hesitated. "Can't remember." A chill slid down her spine. That night, Elsie dreamed again. She was standing at the edge of the lake, moonlight gleaming across the surface like a sheet of glass. A voice called her name, soft, gentle, familiar. It wasn't her mother's, though it carried that same warmth, that same ache of comfort. "Come closer, Elsie." She stepped forward, the mud cold between her toes. The voice was sweeter now, threaded with longing. "Come and see." She leaned forward, and beneath the surface she saw them. Dozens of faces, pale and still, eyes closed as if sleeping. Children, the missing ones. Their hair drifted like weeds, and from their open mouths, bubbles rose and burst in time with the melody. "Join us," the voice whispered. She took another step, water rising to her ankles. It wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, inviting, like a bath drawn just for her. "Elsie," someone shouted. She turned sharply. A boy stood on the shore, dripping wet, his skin faintly translucent in the moonlight. His eyes glowed like coins. "Don't listen," he cried. "Don't—" The lake swallowed his words. The melody surged louder. Elsie gasped and woke. Her bedsheets were soaked. Mud streaked her legs. The window was open. She stumbled to her feet, trembling. On the floor beside the window was a wet footprint, too small to be her father's. And faintly, just beyond the trees, the lake shimmered. The next morning, the entire village buzzed with a strange, brittle energy. Adults smiled wider than usual. Shopkeepers whistled. The postman sang to himself as he rode past. But behind every smile was something wrong. Something too still, too rehearsed. Arthur, now humming constantly, didn't even notice when Elsie asked if he was all right. When she mentioned the missing children, he laughed like it was a joke. "Kids wander off," he said. "Always have. It's nature." "Nature doesn't make people disappear," she said. He didn't respond. His gaze had drifted out the window again to where the trees bowed toward Hollowmere Lake. His lips moved, forming silent words. Elsie swallowed hard. "Dad?" He blinked slowly, like someone waking from a trance. "Sorry, love. Did you say something?" That evening, Mara came knocking. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red. "Elsie," she whispered. "Toby's gone." Elsie's stomach dropped. "What?" He said he was going to prove it, that he'd go to the lake after dark. I told him not to, I told him—" Her voice broke. Elsie grabbed her coat. "Show me." The path to Hollowmere was swallowed in fog. The reeds swayed in the breeze, hissing softly. The moon hung low, distorted, its reflection trembling in the black water. There, near the edge, lay Toby's shoe. One, half buried in the mud. Mara fell to her knees, sobbing. He can't be! He can't!" Elsie knelt beside her, staring at the shoe, at the footprints leading into the water and stopping abruptly at the edge. Her throat tightened. Something rippled beneath the surface. And then she heard it again. The song. It was beautiful, too beautiful. Each note pressed against her chest, soft and insistent. She could feel her pulse sinking to it. Her thoughts slowed. Her eyes burned with tears she couldn't explain. "Come closer," it whispered. "It's all right. It's safe." Elsie's foot slid forward without meaning to. Then Mara grabbed her wrist. "Elsie, no!" The voice inside her head faltered. The melody stuttered, then grew distant. The fog trembled as if the air itself exhaled. Elsie gasped, stumbling back, her heart hammering. What was that?" she whispered. Mara was crying. "You almost went in." "I didn't mean to." "No one means to," Mara said softly. That night, neither of them slept. Elsie sat by her window, staring out at the distant shimmer of the lake. The melody didn't return, but the silence that replaced it was somehow worse. She thought of Toby, of the missing children, of the boy in her dream who had tried to warn her, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. There was something down there, something that sang. And if she didn't find a way to stop it, the entire village would soon be gone. Chapter 3. The lake looked different in summer. Softer somehow, like it had decided to forget the stories told about it during winter, the missing fishermen, the drowned deer, the strange singing that no one admitted to hearing. Now, under the July sun, it was nothing but rippling blue silk stitched between green hills. Elsie stood on the grass with a sandwich in one hand and her sandals in the other, staring at the water like it might stare back. "Go on, Elsie," called Toby from the shallows. "It's warm." He splashed, sending sunlight glittering across the surface. Behind him, a group of other children, some she recognized from school, others visiting cousins from out of town, laughed and dove in one by one, their laughter carried by the wind like paper kites. Elsie forced a smile but didn't move. The lake had been calm all morning, but when she looked at it too long, her stomach turned. It wasn't the water itself that frightened her. She'd swum in rivers before. It was the quiet beneath it, that strange, expectant silence she felt whenever the breeze paused. She toed the edge of the grass, her reflection bending in the ripples. The water seemed to hum, only faintly, like a song caught under breath. "Don't tell me you're scared," teased Mara, flicking water from her fingers. "It's just a lake." Elsie wanted to say something back, to laugh or pretend she'd forgotten her towel, but her voice stuck. She thought of the old stories her grandmother used to whisper before bed, about the lake that could sing children to sleep, and once asleep, it could make them dream forever. Toby swam farther out. The others followed, their heads bobbing like dark stones, and then, without warning, they stopped. All at once, every child in the water turned toward the center of the lake. They weren't playing anymore. Their eyes were half shut, dreamy, their mouths open slightly as if listening. Elsie froze. The air felt heavy, thick with something she couldn't name. Even the birds had gone quiet. A soft humming rose from the middle of the lake. A tune. The same lullaby she'd heard that night, the one the adults pretended wasn't real. Elsie's skin prickled. The children began to drift forward in unison, their arms gliding through the water with eerie calm. Toby too, his eyes unfocused, lips moving silently with the song. "Toby!" she shouted, running to the edge. "Toby, come back!" He didn't answer. A scream broke the stillness. One of the younger boys splashed violently, choking. In seconds, the adults were running, wading into the water, dragging children back by their arms. Someone shouted for help. Someone else yelled a name. The song stopped. The lake returned to silence, as if nothing had happened at all. By the time they gathered everyone on the shore, one child was missing: Peter Holloway, the baker's son. His mother stood knee-deep in the water, calling his name until her voice cracked. They searched all day. By evening, the constable said it was a tragic accident, a slip, a current, maybe a cramp. The same story they always told. The adults nodded grimly, unwilling to meet each other's eyes. But Elsie knew what she'd seen. They hadn't slipped. They hadn't panicked. They'd listened. That night, as she sat by her bedroom window, she could still hear the faint echo of the tune in her head, that soft, lilting lullaby that had no words, just sorrow. And she realized something that made her blood go cold. The song didn't call to everyone. Only the children. Chapter 4. The nightmares began the night after the boy was found, or rather, wasn't. Peter Holloway's name stopped being spoken by breakfast. The grown-ups had decided it was an unfortunate accident, which seemed to be the village's favorite phrase when anything couldn't be explained. But even as they said it, their eyes never lingered on the lake. They hurried past it, faces tight, as if pretending it wasn't there could make it forget them too. Elsie tried to do the same. She helped her mother hang laundry, tried to read, even went with Mara into town for lemonade. But when the wind shifted, carrying that faint, humming note through the trees, her stomach twisted. That night she dreamed of water. It was quiet, too quiet, except for a distant hum that pulsed beneath the surface. She floated, weightless, her hair fanning around her like a halo. Shafts of light broke through from somewhere above, reaching down to her fingers. And beyond that light, she saw shapes pale, drifting shapes that moved with the rhythm of the song. They were children. Their faces were soft, blurred, eyes closed as though asleep. Their lips moved in time with the melody, and when they smiled, bubbles escaped like sighs. Then one of them turned its head. A boy with straw-colored hair. Peter Holloway. His mouth opened, not to breathe, but to sing. The note echoed through her bones. Elsie woke with a gasp. Her nightgown clung to her skin, soaked as though she'd been pulled from the lake itself. The sheets were damp, her hands trembled. She glanced at the clock on her nightstand. 2:17 a.m. The window was open, wide open curtains breathing softly in the night breeze. She climbed out of bed, heart pounding, and crossed to close it. But when she looked out, her breath caught. The grass below was flattened, a narrow trail leading from the house toward the edge of the road, where the hill sloped down toward Hollowmere Lake. It couldn't be. She'd been asleep. She'd dreamed of water, not walked into it. Her father said it was sleepwalking. Her mother said it was just her imagination again. They locked her window that night and left the hallway lamp on. But it happened again. Each dream began the same, the still water, the faint hum, the drifting light below. And each time, she woke somewhere else. The second morning, she found herself in the back garden, barefoot, dew clinging to her feet. The third by the gate, her hair tangled with leaves, eyes still half-lidded from sleep. Her father's voice had grown tight with frustration. "Enough of this, Elsie. You've been reading too many ghost stories." But Elsie wasn't sure what frightened her more, that he didn't believe her, or that she might believe herself. Because each night, the song grew clearer. It no longer sounded like music from a distance. It sounded like something alive, something calling her by name, not with words, but with the melody itself. And sometimes, just before she woke, she could swear she saw the surface breaking above her, light spilling in ripples, as if someone waited at the top, watching her sink. On the fourth night, she dreamt of a hand. Pale, small, reaching toward her through the water. She reached back. When she woke, her palm was wet and on her wrist was a fine smear of dark silt. Chapter 5. For days after her last dream, Elsie tried not to look at the lake. That was easier said than done. Hollowmere was the kind of village that seemed to wrap around its secrets instead of hiding them. Every path wound back to the same glimmering stretch of water. Every breeze seemed to hum with that faint, impossible tune. Even when she sat by her window and tried to read, the reflection of the lake shimmered in the glass like a memory she couldn't stop replaying. It was Saturday morning when Mara came calling, her braids bouncing as she leaned over the fence. "Elsie, come on, the sun's out. You can't stay inside all day." Elsie hesitated. She'd spent the last few nights locking her door, stuffing rags under the cracks so no light could draw her toward the window. She hadn't told Mara about waking up outside, or about the dreams. She knew how it would sound. "I don't really feel like—" "Please," Mara interrupted, pouting in the way that usually worked. "We're just walking, not swimming, promise." The word swimming sent a chill up Elsie's back, but she nodded. Maybe fresh air would help. Maybe if she faced the lake in daylight, it would lose some of its power. They packed a small basket of bread rolls and lemonade, waved to Mrs. Parker across the lane, and followed the dirt path toward Hollowmere's shore. The summer air shimmered. Dragonflies hovered above cattails, and the trees seemed to hum with a low, vibrating sound. Cicadas, she told herself, though it came in steady, rhythmic beats. When they reached the lake, Mara kicked off her shoes and walked along the edge. The water lapped softly, harmlessly, at her toes. "See?" she said with a grin. "Nothing scary about it." Elsie smiled back, trying to believe it. The lake looked ordinary now, peaceful even. The sun turned the surface into rippled glass. The village children's laughter echoed faintly from the far bank, where a few had already gathered to skip stones. Still, when Elsie looked closer, she could see her own reflection staring back, pale and uncertain, her brown hair stirring with the wind. And beneath it, just for a moment, another shape moved. It was gone before she could blink, like a fish darting through shadow. But when she leaned in again, the surface shimmered, and this time, she saw a face. It wasn't her reflection. The features were too small, too soft. Eyes closed, lips slightly parted. A boy. Elsie gasped and stepped back, heart racing. The image broke apart into ripples. "What is it?" Mara asked, rushing over. I saw something," Elsie whispered. "Someone." Mara peered into the water, squinting. "You're imagining it. It's just the sun on the water. You've been jumpy ever since the picnic." Elsie wanted to agree. She wanted to laugh it off and go home and forget. But when the breeze shifted, the surface smoothed again, and in that moment she saw them. Dozens of faces. Children, pale and blurred like old photographs, drifting just beneath the light. Their hair floated in wisps, their eyes gently shut. One of them, she was sure, was Peter Holloway. Another looked almost like the Miller twins who'd moved away last year. Elsie's throat tightened. "Mara," she whispered. "Look." But the moment Mara leaned closer, the water clouded over with silt. The reflections vanished. The lake went still. "Elsie, there's nothing there," Mara said softly. "You have to stop doing this to yourself." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the lazy hum of insects. Elsie picked at the crust of her roll, too uneasy to eat. The longer she stared at the lake, the more she noticed how it didn't quite behave like normal water. It seemed to breathe a faint rise and fall, as if the whole thing were alive. And beneath that breathing came the faintest trace of music again. The same melody. At first, it was so quiet she thought she was imagining it, a thin, humming note drifting on the wind. Then it grew stronger, weaving through the air in a rhythm that didn't belong to any human song. Mara didn't react. She just smiled dreamily, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You hear that?" Elsie whispered. "Hear what?" "The music." "There's no music, Else." But there was. Elsie could hear it curling under Mara's voice now, a lullaby too slow, too sad to be from any fairground or church organ. It came from the center of the lake, rising in steady waves like a heartbeat. Her friend's face looked softer now, her pupils wide, unfocused. "Maybe I will swim," Mara murmured. "No." Elsie grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "You promised." Mara blinked, startled. The spell broke. She shook her head as if waking from a nap. "What's wrong with you?" "You were about to walk in," Elsie said. "You didn't even notice." "I wasn't—" Mara stopped. Her voice faltered. She looked down at her bare feet, the damp sand clinging to her toes, and swallowed. "Maybe you're right. Let's go." They packed up quickly, neither speaking as they walked home. The path through the woods felt longer this time, the air heavier. Elsie kept glancing back over her shoulder, half expecting to hear that humming again. When they reached the village, the church bells were tolling 6 o'clock. Her father stood at the gate, hands on his hips. "Elsie, hand," he barked. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Sorry, father, Inside, now." She obeyed, the words catching in her throat. He didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't need to. Everyone knew where children went on summer days. That night, she tried not to dream. She left her window shut, her lamp burning low, her hands clasped over her chest as if prayer could drown out music. But sleep came anyway. She was standing at the lake's edge again, the moonlight stretching like silver fingers across the water. Something shimmered beneath the surface shapes, turning lazily, eyes glinting like glass marbles. A voice, faint, childlike, whispered her name. "Elsie." She froze. The voice came again, closer this time. "Elsie, come see us." Her reflection rippled, and from the water rose the faintest outline of a hand white as moonlight, dripping and trembling. She tried to scream, but her throat was locked. The hand reached toward her, brushing her fingers cold as stone, and she jolted awake. For a moment, she couldn't tell if she was still dreaming. Her room glowed with a strange light, silvery, pale, as if underwater. Then she realized the curtains were moving. The window was open again. And from outside, drifting up through the dark, came the faint, sad hum of the lake. Chapter 6. It rained the next morning, a heavy, silvery rain that made Hollowmere look older than it was. The cobblestones glistened, and mist hung low between the houses like unspoken words. Elsie stood by her window, staring at the droplets chasing each other down the glass. She could still feel the cold touch of that hand from her dream. She could still hear the faint hum that hadn't left her head, no matter how many times she shook it off. Her father had gone early to the shop, her mother humming softly while sweeping the kitchen. For a moment, the world seemed almost normal. But then she caught it again, a sound threading through the rhythm of the rain, a melody. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, as if the whole village were breathing the same note. Elsie pressed her hands to her ears. "Stop," she whispered. "Please stop." It didn't. The hum seemed to know her name, now rising, falling, curling through her thoughts. She turned away from the window, heart racing. Something had to be done. She couldn't keep pretending it was all imagination. She needed answers. The village library sat at the edge of the square, a narrow stone building older than the church itself. Few people went there anymore. The only regular visitor was Mr. Hollis, the caretaker, who looked as dusty as the books he watched over. Elsie had never liked the smell inside a mix of paper, mildew, and candle wax. Today, though, it felt like the right place to start. Mr. Hollis looked up from his ledger as she entered. "Ah, Miss Hand," he said, blinking through his thick spectacles. "You're up early for a Saturday. Looking for another fairy tale?" "Not exactly," Elsie said, trying to sound casual. "I was wondering if you have anything about the lake. Its history, I mean." He raised an eyebrow. "Plenty of fishing reports and tide records?" "I meant older, like myths or folklore." He chuckled softly. Ah, the ghost stories again. You're not the first to ask. He shuffled toward a back shelf, muttering to himself. Let's see. Local Chronicles, 1800s. Ah, here. He pulled down a heavy book bound in cracked leather. Legends of Hollowmere Parish. Elsie took it to a corner table and began to turn the pages. The ink had faded, the script looping elegantly in the old style. There were stories of strange lights seen over the moor, of will-o'-the-wisps leading travelers astray, of a cursed tree that grew near the old quarry. Then she found it. A chapter titled, The Song of Hollowmere Lake. Her fingers trembled as she traced the heading. It is said the lake hums every 25 years when the moon and water remember sorrow, it began. In that season, children are drawn to its depths by a melody none but the innocent can hear. Elsie's pulse quickened. She leaned closer. Some say the voice belongs to the drowned. Others whisper of a device, a melody box forged in grief by a woman who lost her only child to the lake. She made it sing to keep her daughter's voice near her, but the song took life of its own. They say it sleeps beneath the water, and when it wakes, Hollowmere remembers. Elsie's eyes widened. A melody box. She flipped the page, but the next section was nearly unreadable. The ink had bled, warped by water damage. The words curse and keeper were faintly visible, but the rest was an illegible smear, as if someone had dropped the book in a puddle long ago. She turned back to Mr. Hollis. Who wrote this? He looked up from his desk. A local historian, I think. Mid-1800s. Why? Do you know if the melody box is real? Mr. Hollis blinked. You mean the old wives' tale? No one's ever found anything like that, dear. It's just a story. Probably based on an old windpipe under the lakebed, natural acoustics and all. But Elsie wasn't convinced. The way the book described it, the song that wakes every 25 years, matched perfectly with the timing. Her grandmother had once told her how, when she was a girl, the lake had gone strange. And now, exactly 25 years later, the music was back. She thanked Mr. Hollis and hurried out into the rain. That evening, she showed the book to Mara. They sat on Mara's front steps, wrapped in blankets, the damp air thick with the smell of moss and rain. Mara frowned at the smeared page. A melody box? Like a music box? Exactly, Elsie said. But one that was cursed somehow. It said the song came from grief from a mother who lost her child. That's awful. I think it's still there, Elsie said quietly, at the bottom of the lake. Mara sighed. Elsie, we've been over this. The lake's just the lake. Kids drown because it's deep and dark and cold. That's all. Then how do you explain what I saw? The faces. Her friend looked away. You didn't see faces. I did. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled through the birch trees. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. Then, faintly, from the direction of the lake, a note. Just one, rising like a breath. Both girls froze. Mara forced a laugh. Probably a bird. But Elsie knew better. The melody that followed was too perfect, too deliberate. Each note flowed into the next with slow, aching beauty, the same lullaby she'd heard since the first night. Mara's expression changed. Her eyes softened, her lips parted slightly. Do you hear it? Elsie whispered. Mara didn't answer. She just stood slowly, as though drawn by invisible strings. Mara? Her friend began to walk toward the path that led to the lake. Mara! Elsie grabbed her wrist, but Mara pulled away with unnatural strength. Her face was blank now, her movements smooth and graceful, almost like she was sleepwalking. The song grew louder. Mara, stop, please. But she didn't. She kept walking, barefoot now, stepping through puddles without flinching, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Elsie ran in front of her, shouting her name. Then, just as suddenly, the music cut off. Mara blinked, eyes clearing. Elsie? What? Why are you shouting? You were walking toward the lake. I was? Yes, you didn't even notice. Mara rubbed her temples. I thought I heard something beautiful. Like home. Elsie felt the cold spread through her chest. That's what it wants you to think. They hurried inside before the rain worsened. Mara's mother gave them towels and warm milk, asking no questions. The adults never did. To them, the lake was a part of life no more mysterious than the sky. But Elsie couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, waiting. That night, she returned to her window. The rain had stopped, leaving the world eerily still. The lake glowed faintly in the distance, reflecting the moon like an open eye. She opened the book again and reread the damaged lines, tracing the blurred ink with her finger. If she squinted, she could make out fragments keeper. Song of sorrow, bound by water and will, must be broken from within. Broken from within, she murmured. Did that mean the melody box had to be destroyed? And if it did, how? She stared out at the water until her eyes burned. The lake seemed peaceful, but she could sense something underneath. A pulse, a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. Then, just as she was about to turn away, she saw movement. A faint light shimmered beneath the surface. It grew brighter, pulsing with the music, and then, impossibly, a small object floated upward. It was a box. No bigger than her hand, made of dark wood with brass inlays. The water seemed to hold it aloft like an offering. Elsie's breath caught. The melody swelled. And then blink, the box was gone. The surface rippled once and silence returned. She stood frozen, her heart hammering. It wasn't imagination. It was real. Somewhere under Hollowmere Lake, something was singing, and it wanted her to hear. She couldn't sleep after that. The phrase from the book repeated in her mind, must be broken from within. If the melody box was down there, someone would have to go after it. Someone would have to end the song. But for now, she could only wait and pray she didn't wake up standing at the water's edge again. Because every time the melody played, it grew stronger. And she was beginning to wonder whether the next time she heard it, she might not be able to resist. Chapter 7. The summer in Hollowmere grew thick and heavy, the air swelling with heat and the faint hum of insects that never seemed to rest. The kind of summer where the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the sound of the lake seemed to reach farther than it should, a low, wavering tone that crept between streets and doorways, as if the water itself had found a way to breathe. Elsie noticed it first in the playground. The laughter was gone. Children sat on the swings without swinging, tracing circles in the dirt with the tips of their shoes. The skipping ropes hung limp, forgotten, while the faint hum of the lake's lullaby drifted on the wind. It was soft at first, barely more than a tune half remembered from a dream, but the children heard it. She could tell. They tilted their heads when it came, eyes losing focus, as if listening to something only they could understand. Heat stroke, Mrs. Dalrymple, their teacher, said briskly, fanning herself with the attendance sheet. They're just tired from the weather. But Elsie wasn't so sure. Because Toby was one of them, and he was never tired. Not Toby, who could outrun anyone on the schoolyard, whose laughter could fill the hollowest space. But even he had changed. He no longer teased Elsie for sketching under the elm or tried to show her his latest collection of bottle caps. Now, when she waved, he would just smile faintly, eyes glassy and distant, humming that strange tune under his breath. The melody was always the same slow, lilting, a lullaby that wound itself through her mind long after it faded. She'd once tried to hum it herself when she was alone, but something about it made her throat tighten, as if the air thickened around her. By the end of that week, 5 children had gone missing. Each disappearance was the same. They were last seen near the lake. The grown-ups said the same words they always did. Terrible accident. Must have gone swimming unsupervised. We'll be more careful. But nobody ever seemed to see anything. No splashing, no screams, no sign of struggle, just gone. Like the lake had opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. The constable went from door to door, his notebook tucked beneath one arm, his voice polite but distant. Hollowmere had seen this before. The villagers just didn't like to talk about it. Every 25 years, the whispers began again. The waters turned strange. Best keep the children inside. And then, just as quietly, everything went back to normal. Except this time, Elsie didn't think it would. That night, she dreamt of the lake again. It was calm, silvered by moonlight, but something stirred beneath. A melody rose up from the depths, soft, coaxing, the kind of song that didn't feel sung so much as remembered. In her dream, children floated just below the surface, eyes open, hair drifting like weeds. Their mouths moved, forming words she couldn't hear. Then one of them turned Toby and reached for her hand. "Come listen," he whispered. She woke with a start, her nightdress damp with sweat, the faint sound of humming still echoing in her ears. At school the next morning, the air was thick with unease. The teachers spoke in hushed tones in the hallway. Mrs. Dalrymple looked pale and kept glancing at the window, and half the seats were empty. The remaining students sat slumped, eyes fixed on nothing, lips moving silently to the same unheard rhythm. Elsie could see their fingers tapping along their desks, counting beats that no one else could follow. When she leaned closer to one of them, a girl named Clara, she heard it again, that lullaby. Barely a whisper, but there. "Clara," she said softly, "what are you singing?" The girl didn't answer. Her pupils were wide, her smile faint and far away. Then, without warning, she stood and walked out the open door. Nobody stopped her, not even Mrs. Dalrymple, who just blinked, dazed, as if she too could hear something calling from beyond the walls. Elsie followed. She trailed Clara down the dirt path that wound through the birches toward the lake. Each step felt heavier than the last, her feet sinking into the soil like it was pulling her in. The closer they got, the stronger the melody became, not from the air but from below. From the water. The surface of Hollowmere Lake was still, but not peaceful. It shimmered faintly under the morning light, as though something beneath was stirring. Clara stopped at the edge, her shoes sinking into the mud. For a moment she swayed gently, like a puppet on invisible strings. "Clara," Elsie whispered again. "Stop." But the girl didn't. She took one step closer, then another. Her foot touched the water and the melody stopped. Just like that. No birds, no breeze, not even the whisper of trees. Clara blinked once, her trance breaking. She looked around, disoriented, and then she screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was something raw and wild, like the sound of being pulled apart. Elsie ran forward, grabbing her by the arm, but her fingers passed through nothing. Clara was gone. Only the ripples remained. By the time Elsie ran back to town, breathless and trembling, no one believed her. "Clara wandered off," they said. "We've called for help." But she could see the look in their eyes, that tired, resigned fear. They'd seen this before. They just didn't want to see it again. That evening, Elsie sat on her bed, staring at the open window. The night air carried the faintest trace of the lullaby, again higher this time, like a child's voice carried on the wind. She pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't stop. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside her head. "Come closer," it whispered. "Come see." She squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of Toby, of Clara, of all the others. The faces she saw in her dreams now seemed to linger at the edges of her waking hours. Sometimes when she blinked, she could almost see them reflected in mirrors or puddles, their expressions peaceful, as though sleep had claimed them, not death. By the end of that week, Toby stopped coming to school. No one seemed surprised. Elsie waited for him after class, sitting on the stone steps until the sun began to dip below the trees. The air was warm and buzzing with cicadas. She could feel the lake's presence even from here, a low vibration in the earth, steady as a heartbeat. When she finally saw him, he wasn't running or laughing. He was walking slowly down the path that led toward Hollowmere, his school bag dragging behind him, his lips moving soundlessly. "Toby," she called. He didn't turn. The setting sun caught his hair, turning it to copper fire. He walked straight, unwavering, like he was following a line only he could see. Elsie's stomach twisted as she realized he was humming. The lullaby again. She chased after him, her sandals slapping against the dirt. "Toby, stop!" But he didn't. When she finally caught up, they were at the lake's edge. The air smelled of moss and iron. The water shimmered faintly in the twilight. Toby stood motionless, his eyes glassy, his reflection rippling below him. He looked peaceful. "Toby," Elsie said, reaching out. "Please, you have to come home." He blinked once, slowly, and for a fleeting second, it was like he recognized her. His lips parted. "Elsie?" "Yes, it's me. Please, come away from there." But the moment shattered. His gaze unfocused again, and the humming grew louder no longer, his voice alone but joined by others, faint and distant, rising from the water. The melody wrapped around them like mist. "Toby, don't—" He stepped forward, and then he was gone. The water didn't even splash. Elsie stood frozen, the world narrowing to the silence that followed. Then, slowly, the humming stopped, and the lake stilled. They found his satchel floating near the reeds the next morning. The police came. The parents cried. The same words were spoken again and again: accident, tragedy. The lake's current must have taken him. But Elsie knew better. She could feel it in her bones. Something was awake beneath Hollowmere. Something that sang to children in their dreams and pulled them closer, one by one, until the lake's lullaby drowned them all. That night, she sat at her window, staring across the meadow toward the faint silver glimmer of the water. The moon hung low, its reflection trembling on the surface like an open eye, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the melody begin again, faint but certain. Only this time, she thought she heard her own name within it. "Elsie, come listen." She closed the window, heart pounding, but the sound didn't stop. It was in the walls, in the floorboards, in her pulse. The lake had noticed her now, and as Hollowmere drifted to uneasy sleep, Elsie lay awake, trembling beneath her covers, knowing that whatever haunted the water, whatever called to her friends, would not stop until she answered. Chapter 8. The night air was colder than usual for early July, carrying a mist that clung to Elsie's skin like a wet cloth. Every shadow along the path to the lake seemed taller, darker, stretching toward her as if the trees themselves were leaning in to whisper warnings. Yet she couldn't stop walking. The pull had become unbearable. Even as her legs ached and her breath came in shallow gasps, the soft hum, the lullaby threaded through the air, tugging at her thoughts, at the edges of her mind. She thought of Toby. She thought of the others. And she thought of the faces she had glimpsed beneath the water. Pale, sad, eternal. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum overlaid by the melody that seemed to match it perfectly. Step by step, she approached the lake, and the silvered surface spread before her like molten glass. The moon's reflection trembled with a life of its own, as though the lake were breathing. Elsie knelt at the water's edge, her fingers brushing the surface. The chill bit her skin, and the hum grew louder, clearer, almost as if the lake were calling her name. "Elsie, come closer." She froze. A glimmer flickered beneath the waves. Then another. A faint glowing form emerged, hovering just above the surface. It wavered like a candle flame, fragile and trembling, but unmistakably human. A child. "Toby?" Elsie whispered, her voice breaking. The glowing figure nodded once, slowly. His features were blurred and shimmering like sunlight reflected through moving water. And yet, she knew it was him. She could feel the echo of his laughter, the warmth of his presence from before he vanished. "Elsie." Toby's voice floated in her mind rather than her ears. It was soft, yet unmistakably urgent. "You mustn't go in. Not like this." Her hands trembled. Toby, what happened? Why are you like this? I'm trapped, he said, flickering with each word. The lake. It doesn't just take. It listens. It keeps us, our voices, our hearts, in its melody. The song. It's the box below. That's what holds us, keeps us singing. Don't let it pull you under, Elsie. Elsie staggered backward, cold sweat clinging to her spine. The box? Toby's glow shimmered brighter, then flickered dimly. The music box. Mother made it. To keep me. But it's wrong. The song isn't hers anymore. It's alive. It wants more. Every 25 years. It takes children, our souls, their voices. All of them. You have to destroy it. Don't wait. You'll... A ripple passed over the surface, and Toby's form wavered violently, struggling against something invisible. Hurry, Elsie, don't wait! Then he was gone, dissolving into the misty lake as though he had never been there at all. All that remained was the faint echo of the lullaby, now layered with countless voices, soft, pleading, blending into a single, sorrowful song. Elsie fell to her knees, clutching the hem of her nightdress, tears running down her cheeks. She couldn't even begin to imagine how many voices were trapped below the water's surface, how many children had been lured by the melody over the centuries. Each note carried weight, a memory of laughter and life, now twisted into a siren call. She realized, with a chill that sank into her bones, that the lake's power didn't end at the shore. It reached into the very air she breathed, into the shadows, the trees, the night itself. Every child who disappeared, every whisper of the melody, every glance into the water that made her shiver. It was all connected. And if she didn't act, Toby would not be the last. Elsie returned home in silence, her mind spinning with plans and fear. Her parents noticed nothing unusual. Her father mumbled something about needing rest after a long week at the shop. Her mother fussed over supper. No one questioned why she looked pale, or why her hands trembled when she poured her tea. The lullaby remained only in her mind, as though the world itself refused to acknowledge it. She spent hours poring over the smeared library pages from the legends of Hollowmere Parish, searching for clues about the music box. Every line, every fragment hinted at its origin: a grief-stricken mother, her daughter lost to the lake, a box made to capture a voice, a song that turned sentient, hungry, eternal. Elsie's thoughts kept returning to Toby's words. It's alive. It wants more. You have to destroy it. Her room seemed to pulse with the memory of the lullaby. She could almost see the children's faces in the shadows, reaching out, silent lips mouthing pleas. She knew she had to find a way to resist the melody, to stop the lake from claiming her too. But she didn't know how. The next day, Elsie wandered through the town, seeking someone, anyone, who might help. The streets were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The villagers went about their routines as if nothing were wrong. Children played in gardens or along the cobblestone streets, their laughter hollow echoes of what had been. Yet she noticed subtle changes. Some walked more slowly, eyes distant, humming in whispers they thought no one could hear. At the market, she saw a group of boys leaning by the fountain. One of them, a boy named Mark, paused mid-step, staring at the sky with a faint, trance-like smile. His lips moved silently, forming the lullaby. When he saw Elsie staring, he blinked rapidly, as if shaking off a spell. "Elsie?" he asked, his voice uncertain, fragile. "Don't go near the lake," she said firmly, almost pleading. "Whatever it is, it's not safe." Mark shook his head. I have to, I hear it." Elsie grabbed his wrist. The faintest pulse of warmth ran through her fingers. "You don't hear it," she said, her voice trembling. "You feel it, and if you go closer, it won't let you come back." The boy's eyes widened. "Come back?" "Yes," Elsie whispered. "Like Toby." He swallowed hard and backed away. The moment was fragile, tense, and fleeting. Then the market called to him in the ordinary language of adults and chores, and he vanished into the crowd. That night, Elsie made her decision. She would not let the lake take her. She could no longer ignore the warning, the truth Toby had given her. She packed a small bag, a lantern, her grandmother's silver locket, an heirloom said to ward off dark enchantments, a notebook, and the fragments of the library book she had managed to copy by hand. Every line of text, every blurred word, every hint about the box's location and its power was burned into her memory. She slipped out into the darkness before anyone could notice, the village asleep behind her. The air smelled damp, metallic, and alive. The surface of the lake glimmered faintly in the moonlight, calm as always, as though it had been waiting for her. And it had. She knelt at the edge, her reflection wavering in the water. For a moment, she was frozen by the intensity of the night. Then, she whispered, almost as if speaking to the water itself, "I will save you, Toby. I will save everyone, but I need to know. I need to know how to destroy it." The lullaby rose again, stronger now, weaving through the reeds and across the meadow, wrapping itself around her chest like a cold embrace. The children's voices were faintly discernible within it, hundreds of them, crying out, pleading. And within the song, Elsie thought she heard one distinct note. Toby's. Clear, urgent, terrified. "It's not too late. Not yet." She swallowed, gripping the silver locket tightly, feeling its cold weight anchor her to the world above water. If she failed, the melody would claim her, as it had claimed so many before. But if she succeeded, she could free them all. And she would try. The moon reflected perfectly in the black water of Hollowmere Lake, and for a single heartbeat, it seemed to wink at her a silent promise or a warning. The lullaby whispered again, "Elsie, come listen." And she did not move closer. Not yet. She had a plan, and she would survive, or die trying. Chapter 9. The village of Hollowmere slept uneasily, the sort of uneasy slumber that carried shadows into dreams and left a chill in the corners of empty rooms. Elsie moved quietly along the narrow cobblestone streets, the soft click of her shoes echoing faintly against shuttered windows. Each house was dark, save for the occasional flicker of a candle or lantern, and the scent of summer rain lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the earthy aroma of the lake that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She knew she needed answers. The library records had offered fragments, but not enough to stop the music box, not enough to save Toby, not enough to save the others. Someone had to know more. Someone who had lived close enough to the lake to understand its dark secrets. Mrs. Corwin. She was the only person in Hollowmere who fit that description. A reclusive figure, the old woman lived in a moss-covered cottage just beyond the eastern edge of the lake. No one visited her. Children whispered that she had once been the daughter of a caretaker, that she had spoken to the water and it had answered. Adults crossed the street rather than meet her gaze, but Elsie had no choice. The path to Corwin's cottage wound through brambles and fallen oaks. Moonlight barely touched the ground, leaving Elsie to stumble occasionally over twisted roots. The air carried a faint hum, the lullaby, distant yet insistent, threading through her mind. Every step toward the cottage made her heart beat faster, and she felt the pull of the lake's song stronger than ever, like a current tugging at her very soul. When she reached the cottage, she paused. Smoke drifted from the chimney and the garden was overgrown, wildflowers and weeds intertwining like a living tapestry. The windows were dark, except for a faint glow in the attic. Elsie knocked softly. Nothing. She knocked again, louder. A slow, deliberate shuffle answered her. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Corwin small, bent with age, her hair silver-white and cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall. Her eyes, pale and luminous, fixed on Elsie with a sharp intensity that made the girl's stomach twist. "You've come," the woman said, her voice like dry leaves brushing over stone. "I've been expecting you." Elsie blinked. You know about the lake, about the music box? Corwin studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in. There is much you need to learn, and little time. The lake has already claimed many this season, and it will not wait for explanations. Inside, the cottage was cramped and filled with stacks of books, jars of dried herbs, and delicate trinkets that gleamed faintly in the lamplight. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to warm the room. The smell of old paper and water-sodden earth permeated the air. Mrs. Corwin gestured for Elsie to sit. You've heard the lullaby, yes? Elsie nodded, her hands gripping her knees. I heard it, and I saw Toby. The old woman's eyes softened, just slightly, though the weight of her gaze remained. He was brave to come back in spirit. Most children do not get a warning. The lake is patient, but it is also precise. It knows when to reach and when to wait. It is drawn to grief and it feeds on hope. Elsie shivered. Why? Why does it take them? Corwin picked up a small wooden box from the table, carved with intricate patterns of water and wind. This, she said, placing it carefully in front of Elsie, is the source of the curse. Your library fragments only hinted at it. The music box was created by my grandmother, the woman who lived here long before me. She lost her daughter to the lake 125 years ago. In her grief, she wanted to preserve her child's voice, to keep her daughter with her always. She poured her sorrow, her longing, her love, into the box. Elsie leaned forward. And that became the lullaby? The song that calls the children? Yes. Corwin's voice was quiet, but steady. The grief made it alive. The melody is not mere music, it is the sound of the lake itself, amplified, strengthened by sorrow. Every 25 years it wakes, and every 25 years it reaches for the children. The ones who answer the call are the ones whose souls it can touch. Those who resist are rare. Elsie swallowed, fear twisting in her chest. So, Toby, the others, they're trapped in the box? Corwin nodded gravely. Not in the box, exactly. The box anchors the melody, keeps it in the lake. Their voices, their essences, their dreams, the lake harvests them, stores them in the song. You can't see them as you would in life, but they are there, eternal, waiting, trapped in harmony. Elsie's throat went dry. How do I stop it? How do I save them? Corwin's pale eyes glinted. You cannot simply destroy the box from the shore. The melody will pull you under. The water itself will resist. You must reach it, hold it, and break it from within. But be warned, some do not return. Elsie's fingers brushed the carved patterns on the box. The wood was surprisingly warm, almost alive. The designs seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly, twisting like currents in water. You'll need more than courage, Corwin continued. You'll need this. She handed Elsie a silver locket, delicate and engraved with strange sigils. It belonged to my mother. It has no power against the lake's song by itself, but it can protect your spirit while you are beneath the surface. Cling to it, and listen to Toby. He is your guide. Elsie nodded, fear and determination coiling tightly in her chest. But how do I know I won't get lost? Be trapped too? Corwin's hand rested on hers briefly, wrinkled but firm. The melody has rules. It can call, but it cannot lie. It cannot deceive your heart, only tempt it. If you remain steadfast and remember the children, you can break it. But your own memories, your own fears, will be your worst enemies. Elsie held the locket in her palm, feeling its weight anchor her. She closed her eyes, picturing the faces of the lost children, the pale moonlight on Toby's hair, the way he had looked before the lake claimed him. Each memory strengthened her resolve. You will need guidance, Corwin added. The lake cannot be fooled, and the box will not surrender willingly. It will fight for every note, every voice. You must be ready. I will, Elsie whispered. Corwin nodded. Good. But first, you must learn to listen, not to the melody itself, but to the gaps, to the spaces between notes. That is where the lake's weakness lies. That is where freedom can be found. Elsie held the locket closer, tracing the delicate engravings. For a moment she imagined the faces of all the children, floating somewhere beneath the water, smiling, waiting. She imagined the box at the lake's bottom, humming with power, and knew she would go to it, no matter the cost. "You must leave before dawn," Corwin said. "The lake will notice you, and once it notices, it will not let go." The sky outside the window was shifting toward pale gray. The first hint of sunlight would be here soon. Elsie tucked the locket beneath her blouse and whispered a quiet promise to Toby, to the children, to herself. "I will free you. I will not let the lake win." She left the cottage, the quiet crunch of gravel beneath her boots the only sound in the still morning. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance, silver and waiting, its surface unnervingly calm. The melody was faint now, almost imperceptible, but she could feel it in her chest, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The challenge ahead was terrifying. The lake was alive, cunning, eternal. But Elsie had the guidance of the keeper, the weight of the locket, and the memory of every child who had vanished. And she had resolve. This time, the lake would not claim her without a fight. Chapter 10. The village of Hollowmere seemed to hold its breath that morning. The sun rose pale and uncertain, filtering through mist that clung to the cobblestone streets and the edges of the lake like a lingering sigh. Birds moved quietly, their usual morning chatter subdued, as if aware that something terrible had begun to stir. Children wandered the streets in half-dazed confusion, some humming faint notes of the lullaby without realizing it. Elsie noticed every detail, every twitch of a mouth, every vacant glance. The lake's song was no longer subtle. It had begun to creep into the very marrow of the village. Elsie hurried along the edge of the market, notebook in hand, copying down what she had learned from Mrs. Corwin. Every fragment, every smudged line of the record she had found pointed toward one truth. The lake's power grew exponentially the closer its victims drew to it. And the melody now seemed to radiate farther, touching more children with each passing hour. She spotted Mara across the square, her best friend's face pale, eyes glassy, mouth moving in imperceptible whispers. Elsie's heart skipped. Mara had been perfectly normal yesterday, but today, she seemed absent, as if a shadow had claimed her mind. When Mara caught Elsie staring, she smiled faintly, almost dreamlike, and hummed a line from the lullaby. "Elsie," Mara said softly, voice distant. Come to the lake. It wants you." "No, Mara," Elsie shouted, crossing the square. "Don't go. It's not safe." But Mara merely tilted her head, listening to the music that no one else could hear. Then, as though waking from a deep reverie, she blinked rapidly and shook her head. I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me." She looked frightened, but her gaze drifted again toward the lake, and the pull was evident even to Elsie. Elsie clenched her fists. She needed to act. The lake was claiming children faster than she could warn them. The song had grown stronger overnight, no longer just a whisper beneath the reeds. It threaded through the air, curling around chimneys, seeping into the wells, vibrating faintly along the pipes of the cottages. Even when she covered her ears, she could feel the hum resonate through her bones. She ran toward the school, hoping to find the other children. The headmistress, Mrs. Kilburn, looked frail and pale as she tried to maintain order. The younger children wandered the playground, their eyes distant, lips moving to some silent rhythm. Teachers whispered that the heat was affecting them, that summer lethargy was to blame. But Elsie knew the truth. From the window above, Elsie spotted Toby's younger brother, Daniel, wandering near the lake's edge. His steps were slow, hypnotized. He hummed a faint line from the melody. She sprinted toward him, heart pounding. "Daniel, stop!" she screamed. But the boy's gaze was fixed on the silvered surface, glassy and hypnotic. His hands reached out as though to touch the water, and for a moment, Elsie felt a chill of terror grip her. Something in the lake shifted a ripple that shouldn't have been there. The reflection of the moon, though the sun had risen hours before, shimmered unnaturally. And beneath that shimmering surface, she glimpsed movement. Hundreds of faint shapes, twisting and writhing like smoke in water. Pale, faceless children, frozen mid-laughter, reaching toward the surface in silent screams. Elsie grabbed Daniel just as he stumbled forward. "Come on! Run!" she shouted, pulling him toward safety. His small hands clutched hers, but he kept turning his head toward the water. The lullaby hummed through the wind, carrying voices she couldn't ignore. One faintly spoke. "Elsie, come closer." She shook her head violently. "No." By mid-afternoon, the village was alive with unease. Parents were beginning to notice the strange behavior. Children walking trance-like toward the lake, whispering to invisible friends, humming lines of music that sounded unbearably sad. Mr. Hand, Elsie's father, waved it off. "It's summer heat, that's all. Nothing more." But Elsie caught the way his hand trembled as he took his mug of tea, the haunted look in his eyes when he glanced at the children drifting closer to the lake. Even the adults weren't entirely immune. By evening, it had become impossible to ignore. The lullaby had intensified. Trees seemed to sway to its rhythm, their leaves rustling in perfect melodic unison. The air vibrated faintly, a pressure on the skin that made every nerve ache. The remaining children were drawn in waves, one by one, toward the water. Some walked openly, some slipped from the gardens unnoticed, drawn by the invisible force. A group of teenagers from the village square vanished just as Elsie had been taught to watch for these things, eyes glazed, smiles faintly eerie, heads tilted as though listening to a secret they could not share. Her heart clenched. Each disappearance was a reminder of the stakes, of how little time she had. And yet, she could not give in to fear. She needed a plan. She returned to Mrs. Corwin's cottage, urgency in every step. The old woman was waiting as though she had known Elsie would come. "They're disappearing faster now," Elsie said, breathless. "The song, it's everywhere. Even the older children, the adults. It's like it's spreading." Corwin's eyes were sharp. "Yes, the melody strengthens the more it claims. Each voice that is trapped becomes part of it, giving it power. You cannot delay any longer. Tonight you must venture to the box, or they will all be lost." Elsie shook her head. "How? I can't just dive into the lake. I'll get trapped too." "You will not be trapped if you hold the locket and remember Toby's guidance. The lake can tempt, but it cannot deceive your heart. You must focus on the gaps in the melody, on the spaces where the notes do not reach. Only there is the path to destroy it." She clutched the silver locket, feeling its cold reassurance against her palm. Every lesson, every warning, every terrified whisper of a vanished child coursed through her mind. She could almost hear the faint echo of Toby's voice. "Hurry, before it claims more." The sun sank below the horizon, and the lake's surface became a mirror of molten silver under the moonlight. The lullaby was no longer faint. It surged through the night like wind through hollow reeds. Elsie approached, heart hammering. She could hear children calling softly, some in their own voices, some just whispers within the song. Their pleas reached her ears as if threaded into the air itself. "Elsie, help. Elsie, save us." She took a deep breath, feeling the pull of the water against her bones. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to flee from the melody that sought to claim her. But she did not move. Instead, she whispered to the night, "I will save you. I will save everyone. I will not let you take another child." The water shimmered in response, almost in acknowledgement, as if the lake recognized her defiance. But the hum was relentless, growing louder with every heartbeat, echoing off the trees, vibrating through the stones of the village itself. Elsie glanced at the cottages in the distance. Every house had a window darkened by shadows. Every shadow seemed to twist slightly, restless. And she realized, with a cold certainty, that the lake had already reached into Hollowmere itself. There was no turning back. Tonight she would descend into the water, Tonight, she would confront the melody. And the lullaby. Oh, the lullaby would remember her. Chapter 11. Night had fallen over Hollowmere like a suffocating blanket, thick and heavy, pressing down on rooftops, streets, and the darkened waters of the lake. Elsie stood at the edge, the cool sand and reeds brushing her ankles, the silver locket clutched tightly in her hand. The lullaby that had haunted her days now surged around her like a living presence. Every note vibrated through the air, threading into her thoughts, tugging at her very bones. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, deceptively calm, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the stars above. But she knew better. Beneath that deceptive tranquility lay thousands of whispers, voices trapped in perpetual song, all waiting. Her heart hammered as she adjusted the straps of the lantern slung across her shoulder. Its weak light barely pierced the thick darkness, but she didn't need it to see the lake. The song guided her, guided and tempted. It called her name softly, insistently. Elsie, come closer. She took a deep breath. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, to leave the cursed waters behind. But she remembered Mrs. Corwin's warning and Toby's faint, spectral guidance. The locket, warm against her palm, was her anchor. She whispered Toby's name into the night, summoning courage, summoning focus. I'm coming, she said softly, and then louder. I'm coming for you, all of you. With a trembling hand, she stepped into the shallow water. The chill wrapped around her ankles, then knees, creeping up her legs with icy fingers. The hum of the melody intensified, a low thrumming that matched her heartbeat. With each step, the water seemed to pull her forward, soft tendrils of pressure guiding her deeper. Above her, the moonlight fractured across the rippling surface. Below, she glimpsed shadows, vague, shifting forms that danced just beneath the glassy veneer. Pale hands, flickering faces, the faintest hints of children she recognized, Toby, Daniel, Mara, all frozen mid-motion, whispering, waiting. The lake whispered promises in a language that bypassed thought entirely. Safety, comfort, joy. Join us. Forever. It tried to wrap her mind in false warmth, a dreamlike haze that made her knees weak. Elsie staggered, nearly falling, but she clutched the locket and ground her teeth. She remembered Corwin's words. It cannot deceive your heart, only tempt it. She pressed forward. The water reached her waist, then her chest, cold and relentless. And then, a hand faint, glowing, brushed her arm. Toby? She whispered. The glow solidified slightly, forming the shape of her friend. He hovered just beneath the water's surface, translucent but unmistakable. His voice was a faint echo, carried by the melody. Elsie, the box, the melody. It is here. Yes, she whispered back. I'm here. I'm coming. Tell me how. He pointed downward toward the dark heart of the lake. Follow, it will fight. But you must focus. The locket. It is the key. Elsie swallowed, fighting panic. The water was now up to her shoulders, cold like liquid iron. Currents twisted around her, tugging at her arms and legs, attempting to pull her off balance. Shadows swirled, forming indistinct shapes that reached, clawed, and whispered in voices she recognized. Elsie, stay. Join us. Never leave. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to continue. Every step forward felt like wading through tar, every movement a battle against the lake's subtle coercion. The glow from Toby's spirit shone faintly, a guide that pulsed in time with the melody, leading her through the water toward the bottom where the box awaited. Then, the water changed. It became lighter, shimmering with an unnatural glow. Toys, small shoes, and floating fragments of lost summer days drifted just beneath the surface. Elsie's stomach churned as she realized these were the remnants of the children already claimed frozen echoes of innocence trapped in the watery grave. She recognized Daniel's toy boat, Mara's wide-brimmed straw hat, a tiny stuffed rabbit with one eye missing. The melody was deafening now, each note a scream of voices entwined with music. It wrapped around her mind, trying to lull her into surrender. Elsie, You are safe here. Forever. No, she screamed, shaking her head violently. I am not yours. I will not let you take another child. The locket flared against her chest, warm and heavy, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She clutched it tightly, feeling its strange energy infuse her spirit with courage. Slowly, she began to move downward, following the guidance of Toby's light. The deeper she went, the more distorted the water became. Shapes twisted and morphed, tiny faces pressed against invisible glass, pale hands reaching out as if to warn or to grasp her. Their whispers became cries. Help. Help. Free us. Save us. Elsie closed her eyes for a moment, letting the locket's warmth ground her. She repeated each child's name, mentally, desperately. Toby, Daniel, Mara. She visualized each of their faces, their laughter, their voices, their fear. The music tried to drown her thoughts, to drown her identity, but she held on. At last, she glimpsed it. The melody box rested at the lake's bottom, faintly glowing, half buried in silt and scattered toys. Its carvings gleamed like polished bone, intricate gears and runes etched into the wood, but the box itself seemed alive. The voices of hundreds of children poured from it in a cacophony of notes, twisting, spiraling, a vortex of trapped souls. Elsie's chest tightened. The water around the box vibrated, pulsing with the song. As she approached, the box resisted, currents forming walls to block her path. Shadows of children reached from the sides, pleading, some smiling, some twisted in silent agony. The melody pressed against her mind, filling it with overwhelming grief, fear, and longing. She gritted her teeth and held the locket to her chest. I am here to save you, she whispered. I will not fail. Toby's spirit hovered beside her. Elsie, the gaps, between the notes. Focus, strike when it falters. She studied the box carefully. The melody pulsed in waves, each note a physical vibration she could almost feel in her fingertips. Between the pulses, there were tiny gaps, imperceptible pauses, faint voids in the song's armor. That was the weakness. That was the point she had to strike. Elsie placed her hands on the box. The wood felt alive, thrumming against her palms. Currents lashed at her arms, and a high-pitched screech of dozens of children's voices echoed in her ears. Shadows writhed violently, the lake itself fighting to keep the melody alive. But she did not move. She focused, counting the notes, waiting for the gaps, listening to the silence between the cries. And then, with the precision of desperation, she struck the box's center, pressing the locket against the carvings. A shockwave pulsed outward. The current screamed, the shadows twisted violently, but the box shuddered and split. A brilliant, blinding light erupted from the center. Hundreds of voices cried out in harmony, relief, joy, fear, all mingled together. The water churned around her as hundreds of faintly glowing forms shot upward like shooting stars, spiraling toward the surface. Elsie clutched the locket, letting it anchor her spirit against the chaos. Above her, the water rippled violently. The lullaby's grip was breaking. The song's melody faltered and fragmented, and the shadows dissipated into pale light, leaving behind only the clear, cold water. Elsie's lungs burned, her arms ached, but she swam upward, following the glowing forms of the children as they escaped the depths. Toby's spirit passed her, brushing her shoulder. You did it, he whispered. You saved us all. The surface broke, and she gasped for air, pulling herself onto the shore as the moonlight danced across the waves. The lake was calm again, almost innocent, as though nothing had happened. But she knew better. The box had been destroyed, the song broken, and the children, all the lost voices, had finally been freed. Elsie sank to the sand, exhausted and trembling. The locket's warmth faded, but she held it tightly anyway, knowing the danger had passed. For now. The melody would not rise again for another 25 years, and Hollowmere had been spared. This time. But in the quiet of the night, she thought she heard a faint hum, almost imperceptible, carried on the breeze. She shivered and whispered, Not now. Not again. And then, silence. Chapter 12. The lake lay before Elsie like a mirror of glass, moonlight shimmering across its surface, now deceptively serene. But beneath the calm exterior, the dark, twisted heart of Hollowmere's secret awaited her. She knelt at the edge of the water, lantern in one hand, silver locket in the other, drawing in deep, trembling breaths. Her legs shook with exhaustion from her earlier plunge, but she could not hesitate. The children still trapped beneath the surface needed her. Mara, Daniel, Toby, and all the others, countless faces, countless souls waited for salvation. Elsie recalled Toby's instructions. Focus on the gaps in the melody, strike at the point where the music falters. The locket would protect her. Yet standing there, staring into the depths where the melody box rested, she felt a wave of fear unlike anything she had experienced. She was alone now, entirely alone, save for the glowing reminders of the trapped children who drifted in the water below like distant stars. The water stretched endlessly downward, black as night. Toys, lost shoes, and bits of clothing floated in eerie patterns, remnants of children who had been claimed over countless generations. The melody that had once seemed fragmented now roared through her ears, growing stronger as she descended, twisting and looping in endless variations, each note alive with the voices of the lost. Every second that passed, the song clawed deeper into her mind. Her thoughts felt like fragile leaves being shredded by the storm of sound. She took a deep breath and plunged in. The cold wrapped around her like iron, seizing her limbs, slowing her movements. The deeper she sank, the louder the voices became, until every note pounded in her skull. The water pulsed as if alive, currents forming walls to block her progress, twisting her downward, spinning her in spirals. Shadows of the lost children brushed against her arms, gentle yet insistent, reaching for the surface, for her, for release. Their eyes, hollow yet pleading, followed her every movement. "Toby," she whispered, clutching the locket. "Guide me. I can't do this alone." A soft glow appeared nearby, forming the unmistakable shape of her friend's spirit. Toby's eyes were solemn, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. "You're stronger than the song, Elsie. Focus on the gaps. Don't let it drown your thoughts. Think of each child. Remember them, their laughter, their voices. Hold that image in your mind. It's your anchor." Elsie nodded, teeth clenched, arms straining against the currents. She forced herself to breathe steadily, to count the beats in the melody, to find the silent pauses in the endless song. Step by step, she moved closer to the lake's bed. The first glimpse of the melody box made her gasp. It was larger than she had imagined, carved from dark wood, etched with intricate runes that pulsed with faint light, almost like a heartbeat. Its center gleamed unnaturally, emitting a glow that illuminated the drowned toys, small shoes, and fragments of the past. The notes emanating from it were no longer simply music. They were voices, hundreds of children, layered and intertwined, crying, pleading, whispering, screaming in eternal harmony. The currents became violent, forming barriers, throwing her off balance. Shadows twisted around her, taking the shapes of the children, their faces morphing between joy and terror. "Join us. Forever. Give yourself." Elsie gritted her teeth, clinging to the locket, and slowly approached the box. The glowing center pulsed in time with the melody, the very air vibrating with each note. She could feel the weight of hundreds of voices pressing into her chest, each one tugging at her heart, her will trying to draw her in, drown her resolve. She reached out, hands trembling, fingers brushing the surface of the box. The wood thrummed beneath her touch, almost alive, responding to her presence, fighting back. Currents twisted violently, shadows lashing, and for a moment she thought she might be pulled into the abyss forever. But she focused. She thought of each child, of their laughter, of the mornings they had played by the lake, of the families that loved them. She visualized them free, whole, smiling and laughing once again. Her heart, her determination, Her memory of everything precious became the anchor she needed. With one deep breath, she pressed the locket against the box's carved center. The contact sent a pulse through the water, rippling outward. The melody faltered. The shadows shrieked, twisting violently as though aware of the shift. Faces of children contorted with both terror and hope, voices rising in a crescendo of sound that threatened to shatter her eardrums. Elsie gritted her teeth and repeated, "I will save you. I will not fail." The box pulsed again, the glow intensifying, and then a single gap appeared in the melody. The pause she had been waiting for, the silent void between the notes. She pressed harder, anchoring the locket against it, and the box shuddered violently. The currents roared, shadows flailed, and then the wood cracked with a sound that was both violent and liberating. A brilliant explosion of light erupted from the box. The trapped children's forms shone like radiant stars, hundreds of faint, glowing souls released from the grasp of the melody. The water churned violently as their voices rose, mingling into a single triumphant cry, a sound so beautiful and pure that it shook the very lakebed. Elsie was buffeted by the surge, pulled in every direction by the force of their freedom. She gritted her teeth, holding the locket close, letting its warmth anchor her as the box shattered completely. Pieces of dark wood floated away, vanishing like shadows at dawn, leaving behind only the clear, calm water. The song faltered, then broke entirely, dissolving into silence. The souls of the children rose upward, illuminated by the soft glow of freedom, spiraling toward the surface. She could see Toby, Mara, Daniel, and countless others. Their expressions were peaceful, unafraid, smiling faintly in gratitude. She reached out with her hands but could not touch them. She could only watch as they ascended, finally free. Elsie herself began to float upward, the water's pressure releasing its grip as the final notes of the lullaby died away. She broke the surface, gasping, water streaming from her hair, heart hammering. The lake was calm, almost innocent once more, a mirror of silver under the moonlight. The air was still, the gentle rustling of trees the only sound. She collapsed on the shore exhausted, trembling, but filled with a fierce, quiet triumph. The locket's warmth faded, but its reassurance lingered. The melody was gone, and Hollowmere had been spared the tragedy it had suffered every 25 years. Yet, as she looked at the surface, she noticed something faint ripples, subtle, almost imperceptible. A whisper in the wind carried a note so soft it could have been her imagination. She shivered, remembering the warnings, the gaps in the melody, the power that had once ruled the lake. The lake was quiet now, but she knew, deep in her heart, that some things were never truly gone. The heart of the song had been shattered, the children released, but the memory of the melody, the echoes of the lost, would linger in Hollowmere forever. And Elsie understood, with both relief and dread, that her life and the lake would never be the same. She rose from the sand, trembling but determined, watching the first hints of dawn stretch across the horizon. The children's faces flickered briefly in the morning mist, pale and radiant, smiling at her. And then they were gone, fading with the light, leaving only the calm, still water, and the knowledge that the song had finally ended. Chapter 13. The first light of dawn stretched over Hollowmere like a cautious hand, brushing the rooftops, gardens, and streets with muted gold. The lake, calm and pristine, mirrored the morning sky, reflecting clouds and trees with perfect clarity. Elsie sat on the damp grass, exhausted, soaked, and trembling, the silver locket clutched tight against her chest. Her body ached in places she hadn't known existed, her lungs burned from the long swim, and her mind still rang with the echo of 1,000 tiny voices. But the weight that had pressed on her chest for weeks, the constant suffocating pull of the melody, was gone. She gazed across the water, searching for any sign of the children she had saved. The glowing souls had disappeared somewhere between the lake's surface and the dawn, leaving only the faint, fleeting memory of their smiles. For a long moment she feared they had vanished again, perhaps trapped in some liminal space between life and the afterlife, their voices fading forever. And then she saw them, brief, shimmering apparitions in the early mist rising from the water. Toby, Mara, Daniel, and the others drifted toward her, pale and radiant, their faces serene and unafraid. They didn't speak, didn't move with the urgency they once had underwater, but their eyes glimmered with recognition and gratitude. Elsie felt tears sting her eyes as they looked at her, a silent chorus of thank you that transcended words. And then, as the sun peaked higher, their forms dissolved, blending into the morning haze, leaving her alone once more. She exhaled a shaky breath, finally allowing herself to lean back against the cool grass. The melody was gone. The song that had haunted Hollowmere for centuries, that had claimed countless children every 25 years, had been broken, shattered by her courage and the locket's strange, protective power. The music box, the heart of the curse, lay in pieces at the bottom of the lake, nothing more than dark, waterlogged splinters, utterly incapable of summoning another note. Elsie's legs ached as she struggled to her feet, scanning the lake shore. The village was waking slowly. Windows creaked open, the faint smell of breakfast drifted through the morning air, and the occasional dog barked from yards still sleepy from the night. She expected to see the parents and adults bustling about, unaware, as if nothing had happened, but the events of the past days had changed her view forever. Hollowmere's surface calm was deceptive. The town's history was carved in the silent sorrow of the lake, in the children lost to it and the families who had grieved quietly, resigned to tragedy every quarter century. Elsie shook her head, brushing her wet hair from her face. Her own parents, who had once dismissed her fears as imagination or worry, would not fully understand what had occurred. But she didn't care. She had seen the truth, and that was enough. She knew the lake would never claim another child, not while she lived, not while she remembered. Footsteps behind her made her startle. She turned to see Mara approaching, her expression pale but determined. "Elsie," she whispered, voice shaking. I don't know how to say this. But the lake, it's really over, isn't it?" Elsie nodded, managing a tired smile. "I think it is. The box is destroyed. The song is broken. They're free, Mara. All of them." Mara hesitated, then reached for Elsie's hand. I saw them too just now. Toby and Daniel, the others. They smiled. I think they really are free." A surge of relief washed over Elsie. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe without the oppressive weight of the melody pressing on her mind. She could finally feel the wind on her face, hear the birds chirping in the trees, and smell the faint sweetness of morning dew without the song twisting her thoughts. Together, they walked along the lake's edge, their footsteps leaving shallow impressions in the damp sand. Elsie glanced down at the water, still calm and silver, deceptively innocent. She could imagine the countless times, over generations, that children had vanished beneath its surface, pulled into a dreamlike state until they were gone. And now, somehow, the lake was empty, silent, powerless. Her thoughts drifted to the parents of the missing children. Many had accepted their losses quietly, without understanding the full horror that had taken their kids. Some had moved on, some had left Hollowmere, carrying grief that could never be fully assuaged. Elsie felt a pang of sorrow for them, for all the families who had suffered, powerless against the curse that had haunted the town for centuries. She had been young, barely 15, yet she had been the one to break the cycle. It was overwhelming. The two girls stopped at a clump of reeds, watching the water's surface ripple gently in the soft breeze. Mara shivered. "Do you think it could come back?" she asked quietly, voice barely above the whispering wind. Elsie shook her head firmly. "No, the box is destroyed. The melody is gone. Nothing can bring it back." She wanted to believe that wholeheartedly, but deep down, she knew some things never truly disappeared. The lake's history, its secrets, would linger in Hollowmere, whispered in the rustle of reeds, in the glint of moonlight on still water, in the shadows at dusk. But at least the children were safe now. At least, this time, there would be no more disappearances. Mara glanced at her, eyes wide. "Elsie, you were incredible. I don't think anyone else could have done what you did." Elsie gave a tired, almost embarrassed smile. "I didn't do it for me. I did it for them, for every child who ever disappeared. For Toby, Daniel, Mara, and for all the others we don't even know." They sat for a long moment, silent, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the shore. The silence was profound after so many days of the haunting melody, and it felt almost sacred. Elsie traced the outline of the locket with her fingers, the silver now dull from its journey, yet warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of her courage and the bond it had represented. As the sun climbed higher, she noticed faint traces of movement in the early mist. Nothing solid, nothing threatening, just hints of light, glimmering like distant stars. She smiled softly. Perhaps they were the children, finally at peace, saying goodbye in their own way. Perhaps it was simply her imagination, a reward for enduring so much. Either way, the sight filled her with hope. Time seemed to stretch, slow, forgiving. The horrors of the lake, the endless hum of the melody, the weight of the trapped voices all began to fade, leaving only memory and relief. Hollowmere itself seemed to exhale, the town shaking off a burden it had carried silently for generations. The curse, the song, the tragedy, all now belonged to history. Elsie rose, brushing sand from her wet clothes, and began the walk back toward the village. Mara followed closely, both of them silent, letting the morning light guide them. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if the burden of centuries had been lifted, carried away with the shattered box and freed voices. As they reached the outskirts of the village, Elsie paused, glancing back at the lake one last time. The water shimmered like a mirror of silver and moonlight, calm, innocent, deceptively peaceful. She felt a shiver, not of fear, but of awareness, a reminder that some things, though broken, leave their echoes behind. She touched the locket once more, letting the warmth seep into her heart. "Goodbye," she whispered softly, voice barely audible over the gentle morning breeze. "Thank you for trusting me." The wind stirred the reeds, carrying the faintest hint of a melody, softer than a sigh, softer than a memory. Elsie let it wash over her, neither afraid nor angry, simply acknowledging the echoes of what had been. Decades later, the villagers would still whisper about that one summer, the summer the lake forgot to sing, the summer the melody was broken and the children were freed. And though most of Hollowmere's residents had no idea why things had changed, the story lived on in hushed tones, in fearful respect, in quiet awe. The lake was a reminder of both sorrow and courage, of lives lost and lives saved, and of the girl who had dared to dive into the heart of a song and emerge victorious. Elsie, walking home alongside Mara, felt the first rays of sun touch her face. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she breathed freely, completely, and allowed herself to feel hope. The lake was silent now. The song was gone. And the children, all of them, were finally free. She smiled softly, a mixture of triumph, relief, and lingering awe. Hollowmere had been saved. She had saved it. And in the distance, the water sparkled like diamonds, reflecting the dawn of a new beginning. For the first time in 25 years, the lake's song had truly ended.
Thanks for listening. Stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next story.